so that we're recording. So we're in another edition of NOYO Jazz. And I see Eli's got the quote unquote the lick in front of his face. Dibba-dibby-doo. Don't think I don't know what that is. I totally do. There was a whole year where I did that for a whole stretch of gigs. It's like that was my mission. I had to put the lick in at least one of my solos every night. Everybody was doing that challenge. So yeah, that was like 5-6 years ago. But yeah. And then there was a great video where they showed like Coltrane and Miles and Brubeck and all these rock players playing the lick. So yeah. Yep, you got it. You totally got it. So let me open this up real quick by asking you, Aaron, specifically, if that Doodle Tongue video actually helped.
Kind of. It helped kind of boost the tone.
Okay.
And at that point, it's just going to be practicing and listening for tone.
Yeah.
The Doodle Tongue itself, it's still kind of like, I'm trying, but I'm not sure how it really.
No. I get it. I get it. And don't get discouraged because nothing comes overnight. Not in jazz, because I mean we're talking about, like I was saying, it's a whole new set of articulations, way to think about rhythms, way to pat your foot on 2 and 4. You know, this articulations, phrasing, theory, all this stuff is put in a different box with jazz. You know, that's why many people sit there and they feel that they have to make the decision, even though you can play quote unquote what is considered classical music, you know, in various wind ensembles and orchestras and things like that. That's such a set of rules that's so thick. And the jazz set of rules are a completely different thing. You know, very, very few people can pull it off well to do both. You know what I mean? Wynton is one that can, you know, he's won Grammys for jazz and he's won Grammys for, you know, classical trumpet music. And that's really, really hard to do. And he even talks in many of his books about how he has to like set aside time that's what he calls shed time, where he's in the woodshed and he's just practicing nothing but classical articulations and what is considered classical technique, and that's all he focuses on before he makes a classical recording. And then when he's back with like Lincoln Center and they're about to do an album, then he has to do nothing but woodshed on jazz articulations and jazz phrasing and stuff like that, because they are two totally different worlds. So don't get discouraged. That's all that tangent is to tell you about, you know, is that it's not going to come overnight, and just keep on doing the doodle 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 little that sort of thing that the guy was talking about. You know, I think that quote unquote smoky tone where you just lead with the air before the lips actually buzz, I think that's probably easier to accomplish quicker. But yeah, that kind of dual tongue, man, don't get discouraged, because it took me forever to get phrasing on the saxophone, because for forever you hear younger jazz cats, myself included when I first started, that you're going, and it sounds very kind of hokey, you know. But there's a certain technique, and Asa, I hope you're listening to this too, where you can put your tongue on a reed. And the reason I'm saying this, Aaron, is because it's just as difficult for doodle tonguing and brass as it is for this kind of half tonguing articulation for woodwinds, anything with a reed, clarinet, saxophones, right? Where there's a technique where you can put your tongue on the reed and you still get a full tone that's in tune. It's just kind of half volume. Right? So for instance, you can go, and my tongue is on the reed for every one of those notes. Now, the minute I let my tongue off the reed, you get like a burst articulation of air, and that helps with the swingability technique, right? So I'm going to do that very slowly on every other note, so you kind of hear what I'm talking about. You hear the difference?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that it took me a year to get that steady. So, and I mean, and I live in and I breathe jazz. So, right. So what I'm saying is, don't get discouraged. That dude, just keep at it, and one day it'll happen. And you're like, oh, that's totally what Mr. Holloway was talking about. Yep. So it could be someday in April next year. It could be next summer. It could be 3 months from now, right? Just keep at it. don't give up. That's all I'm saying, right? So, okay, so today I want to finish up with the jazz scale folder. I want to talk about diminished scales, whole tone scales, altered scales, and then the jazz scale workout from Jackie McLean, right? And sadly, the Jackie McLean, since he's a saxophone player, does not have that in bass clef. So I apologize, Eli, but
I can read treble.
okay.
I'm fine. Yeah.
Okay, good. So I was going to say, I mean, it's nothing that is that crazy. And in fact, you might actually have an advantage on this, Eli, because the idea of this is not to read note for note what's going on, but to really realize more than anything, this is like, okay, this is this major scale and this is this major scale. And so during that workout, it's like just training your mind of, okay, what's this major scale? And that's what is the focus. And then it's minor scales, and then it's major arpeggios, minor arpeggios. And I would actually, I'm going to talk more about that when we get to that point, but it's training your mind to just go, okay, that's what this is. Now it's up to my ears and my fingers to get the concept, as opposed to reading note for note. You know, that's the thing, is that a lot of these things I'm giving you are just diving boards, you know what I mean, so to speak, is because I don't want you to necessarily read it like you would a concert piece, more so than like, okay, this is what the concept is. Go from that concept, use your mind, your ears, and your fingers, and go with that, because that's what a lot of jazz is. There's tons of guys that don't even believe in using real books at gigs. Like you get like Gary Bartz over at Oberlin, right? He's a world famous saxophone player, played with Miles in the 70s and is a legend in his own right. He said, how many actors do you see in movies that have the script right in front of them? He goes, none. How many plays do you see where they have the script right in front? None. He goes, so jazz should not be any different. You should not have the music right in front of you. You should have already internalized it to the point where you know what the changes are, how to solo, how the song goes, you know, all those 2/5s and things like that, and scales that you can use. So with that being said, there's a lot of truth in that. At this point, it's okay to use materials and lead sheets, because we're all just kind of learning. But there's a lot of these concepts that I'm trying to introduce to y'all that's just launching points. So that's my disclaimer for that, okay? So that being said, when we get to that workout, even though it is in treble, you're gonna be good, Eli, okay? So real quick, before we jump into diminished scales, are there anybody else that has any kind of questions? Don't forget, Asa, I know you're muted. Aaron, you are too. But you can type in any questions that y'all may have on any of the things that we've led up to thus far. Bebop scales, major, minor, dominant, pentatonic, scale modes, blues scales, any of those apps, any of those supporting materials, etc. Has anybody got any questions? I just always like to open up these things first off with any questions and go ahead and answer those first before I jump into the next thing. Okay, everybody good? Sweet, okay. Thumbs up, all right. So I'm gonna mute everybody, and then, there we go. And then I'm just going to, there we go. And I'm just gonna go ahead and jump into diminished scales then, okay? So if you will pull up your folder number 3 that says jazz scales, it should be number 11. And I'm gonna skip around a little bit. I'm gonna go 11, 13, 12, 14. So I'm gonna switch 13 and 12. And you'll see why in just a minute, okay? So let's look at number 11 first. I'm gonna pull this up and let's see, I'm gonna say share screen. There we go. Boom. All right, so you should be able to see from what my screen says, diminished scales, and this is what you should also have in your folder as well. So you see that it's not like the bebop scales, and it's not like the blues scales, and that there's 12 of them, right? There's not like 12 of them listed. You'll notice that there's a big 1 right here, and then there's like 3 scales, and then there's a number 2 right here, okay? And the reason for that is because there is only so many diminished scales before they start repeating. So essentially, C diminished scale is the same thing as E flat diminished scale, which is the same thing as F sharp diminished scale, which is the same thing as A diminished scale. And you see these little notes that I've made underneath, right? E flat, same as C, F sharp, same as C, and A. Now, the reason that is because they're all the same notes, just different things, you know, different starting points. And that's because they're all symmetrical scales. They all use the exact same notes. So let me go ahead. I'm going to play you kind of what this sound is. I'm going to play it kind of slowly. Now, I'm also going to go, I'm going to re-articulate the root where it says flat 3, where it says flat 5, and where it says 6. It sounds a little deeper than a natural minor scale. So it's different, it's got a different sonority when you hear it than a minor scale. Now, you could do the exact same with E flat, and it's got the exact same sound. And there's a sound to that that almost you've heard in classical pieces as well, because diminished chords, which is what this scale is made up of, that's been around in classical music for hundreds of years, right? So the idea is that we, as jazz musicians, we are internalizing the fact that we already know that this is how this scale sounds, this is the makeup of this scale, and you just copy and paste for E flat, F sharp, and A. Now, that may seem like 3 random notes, but what happens when you stack C and E flat? E flat is what to C? It is the minor third. When you stack F sharp to E flat, what is that? That's a minor third. When you stack A on top of F sharp, what is that? It's a minor third. So if you were to stack all 4 of them, C, E flat, F sharp, and A, that's all, those are 4 tones with minor thirds in between. And that is what we call a fully diminished 7, right? If I were to arpeggiate that, hold on. There's a chat question. Is the diminished scale only used over a fully diminished chord, or can you use it over a half diminished chord? These are whole half scales. Okay, so that's the way that you've learned them as whole half scales. I played around with half whole scales before. Can these be interchanged? Yes and no. When you get into half whole as opposed to whole half, whole half can be used. Aaron, I'm going to use your language for a second, and also answer Eli's question. So whole half can be used not only in diminished chords when you're improvising, right, but also a dominant 7, flat 9. So for instance, right, if you have in, let's say it's a B7 flat 9, that would give you the information that it's a B dominant 7 with a flat 9 on top. So that would be B, D sharp, F sharp, A, and then the natural 9 would be C sharp, so we flat that and it becomes C. So here's what you do. Scoot out of the way the root. So instead of B, what do you have? You have a E flat, an F sharp, an A natural, and a C. And those are all a fully diminished chord on top of B. So Eli, what you can do is you can use these scales on any flat 9 as long as it correlates. So over a B7 flat 9, this C diminished scale would work. Or Aaron, this C whole half scale would work, or E flat or F sharp or A, whichever way you want to start, over that B7 flat 9. You just kind of have to forget that there's a root, and it'll work because all the tones are there, right? Now, Aaron, the half whole scales, can be used for half diminished. Okay, so it's like a minor 7 flat 5, like I was talking about last week, or the circle with a slash through it sideways. Okay, so that's the difference. Whole half, using your nomenclature, your words here, whole half is for diminished and flat 9 chords. Half whole is for half diminished. So half goes with half. Look at it that way. That's one way to remember it. Okay. Eli asks, so use it as the third of a dominant 7 flat 9. Yeah, you could use it that way. Or Eli, if you wanted to look at it as whatever the dominant is, you could start at that point. If you wanted to look at it as what is the flat 9 and start at that point, you can. Because even though I was just spelling out for you B, which we're going to take away, E flat, F sharp, A, C, you could start on any one of those, the third, the fifth, the seventh, or the flat 9. And you can see from this diminished scale, right? Let me move this out of the way. You can see from this diminished scale that E flat, F sharp, or G flat, you know what I mean? We're all talking in harmonic here. A or C is going to get you through this scale. See? You could start on the third right here where I'm circling. You could start on the fifth. You could go to A, which is the seventh, or you could even just start on the flat 9, which is the C. So it doesn't matter which way you start or where you start, you know. And I've got some patterns that we're going to get to after we get through 2/5s that actually comes back to some of this stuff and talks about how to use it more. Like I said, so really any of the chord tones besides the root. Yeah. And look right here where I'm circling. There's your B. So it's still within that scale. It's not like it's totally eliminated. It's not like you cannot use that note in passing. Okay. That being said, don't forget that as I'm going over diminished scales, whole tone scales, altered scales, and things like that, this is still just like, this is a hammer. This is a Phillips head screwdriver. This is a flathead screwdriver, right? A lot of the how do you hammer a nail into a wall comes later after we get into 2/5s, okay? So there's a method to my madness, always, okay? I promise. So, but yeah, so, and now this is the other thing that you need to know is that that's for C, E flat, F sharp, and A. Now there's 12 keys, right? So we've just eliminated 4 of them with one scale. So we've got 8 more to go, right? Here's C sharp. It's the exact same sound and it's the exact same construct, but it's up a half step, right? So it's the same thing. And then you go to E. Then you go to G. And B flat is the same too, as I'm right here that I'm circling. And it adds a level of drama to it, you know. That's just arpeggiating, right? So it's the same way. And those are your next 4. The C sharp diminished scale, same as E, same as G, same as B flat. So you learn that scale and you're good for another 4 keys. So that's 8. So it doesn't take a grand mathematician to figure out that D, F, A flat, and B are the exact same thing as well. Right? You just start on different points. And there's a great diminished scale that we're going to get into pattern that you can use over even a 2/5. Right? And you just keep that motor going for whatever the 2/5 progression is. And we're going to get into that, but it's more than just, you don't want to use it just as a scale, right? I mean, you can, but I mean, just using it as a scale for a scale point is just very L7, very square. You don't want to do that, right? So, now, sorry, if it sounds like there's a motorcycle outside my house, it's just very windy here, so I apologize. If you look at the second page of this is the breakdown, and this is kind of what I was explaining earlier, but now you can visualize it as, you know, I say what I'm saying. So I just used the first scale, and this goes for the C sharp, this goes for the D as well. What you have here is, you can see that there's a minor third, 1, 2, 3, like you were going up the C minor scale. Then if you just take that and put it away, and you retonicize that E flat is where your starting point is, you can also see that E flat, F, and G flat is another root 2 minor third within that little cell of 3 notes. Same thing if you retonicize G flat or F sharp, whichever way you want to look at it. G flat, A, that's root note 2 and minor third starting on G flat, and the same for A. You've got A, B, and C natural, right? So basically, if you look at the diminished scale, which is all right here, you have 4 cells, 1, 2, 3, 4. You have 4 cells of root 2 flat 3 or minor third, right? That are all built upon each other. And then, so if you're ever lost, going back to Eli's question about, well, so I can start on any one of the notes, like the third, the dominant fifth, this dominant seventh, or the flat 9. Yeah, no matter where you want to start, because don't forget, you're going to be in the moment while you're improving, and you might think to do this. So it doesn't matter where you start. You just need to know that I just need to go up a minor third. If I want to start here, 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 it doesn't matter, right? Because that's the beauty of it. You've got 4 ways to get the same effect that you'd like to get to, right? Now, to break this down on a second way, as I was saying, here are your minor thirds stacked on top of each other, right? It's the same scale. It's a C diminished scale, but this C, and then you've got E flat, right? And then you've got G flat, and then you've got can you guys still see this? Thumbs up? Okay, good. Sorry, I got some kind of notification from Zoom, so we might have to do this again. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not going to pay $150. I'm sorry. I'm not independently wealthy. So, yeah. So if you go C, E flat, G flat, and A, that's all a C diminished 7, right? So it's all minor thirds stacked on top of each other. The minor third of C is E flat. The minor third of E flat is G flat. The minor third of G flat or F sharp is A. So you stack all those up, that's where you get half of the scale right here in the brackets. Now, the cool thing about it is that there's a second diminished 7 within this, embedded within the scale as well, in the passing tones, right? So you get D, and the minor third above D is F. The minor third above F is A flat. The minor third above A flat is B natural. And those are the passing tones of the scale. So it doesn't matter if you're looking at every other note, right? Or if you're looking at every 3 notes. Whether you're looking at the fact that there's 4 different cells going on in example A, right? Or if you're looking at the fact that there's 2 bigger cells going on in example B, the point is that A, or number 1, then the diminished scale is symmetrical. So when you're in the middle of improving and you want to convey a diminished idea, it doesn't matter where you start as long as you know where to go once you start on the note that you choose to start on. The diminished scale can be used, here you go, on diminished 7 chords as well as dominant chords. See, so that answered kind of like what your questions were before, Eli and Aaron, right? C7 flat 9 or C7, right? The diminished scale can be used, is seen as 4 sets of minor thirds in succession. That's what we were talking about here, the 4 cells, right? They can also, is made up of 2 fully diminished 7th chords. That's what we're talking about in example B. There are only 3 diminished scales, C, C sharp, and D, right? And I've laid out what the other ones are, and that equals out to 12, okay? So the good part is that it's not like you have to learn 12 diminished scales. You really only had to learn 3. Because once you learn 1, it's really the same as learning 4. So work smarter, not harder, right? Right, okay. Now, whole tone scales, much easier, much easier. This is a symmetric scale as well. Before I keep going on, does anybody have any more questions about the diminished scale? No? Nope? Good? Okay, cool. And that's the reason I added a breakdown page, is so when you go back to it, it'll also emphasize some of the things that we talked about, okay? Whole tone scale, right? So this scale is symmetrical. Every note is a whole step apart. So you don't got to remember, Aaron, is it whole half or half whole or any of that stuff, right? Everything is a whole step apart. And I talked about whole tone scales a little bit with some of the Avon kids earlier this week. And this kind of sounds like a dreamy scale. And I don't mean like, oh, that's so dreamy. I mean like a dream sequence sort of thing, right? So you have that, and the cool part is that there's only 2 of these because each note is a whole step apart. So guess what? You start on D, it's the exact same notes. Start on E, exact same note. Start on F sharp, exact same notes. Start on G sharp or A flat, exact same notes. Start on B flat, exact same notes. You get where I'm coming from, right? Okay, so there's only 2 of these because you go up to D flat and it's the exact same thing. D flat, E flat, F, G, A, B, exact same sound. Now, if you were to arpeggiate things, notice this: C, E, G sharp, D, F sharp, B flat. Does anybody know what that arpeggio would be? What kind of C, E, and G sharp? I see typing. This is good. Augmented chord, absolutely. Way to go, Eli. Augmented triad, good, Aaron, same deal, right? So what it is you hear that, and what I always like to associate is you can hear an augmented triad before you even know how it sounds. Because if anybody's listened to the Beatles, you've probably listened to Abbey Road. And the very first opening chord to Oh Darling on the guitar, boom, bang, 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 is an augmented chord. So you have that sound. You already know what it sounds like if you've listened to enough Beatles songs, right? So it's the same thing. Oh, darling, right? So yeah, that's my one Beatles impersonation you'll get for the year. So my point is that you can use these besides in a scalar motion, right? You can go every other and keep going like that, or you can arpeggiate and go that route. See what I'm doing? I'm going boom, 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 and then I'll go into D, dum, bum, bum. So you can arpeggiate and still do that. What chord can you use this over besides the augmented chord? Well, that's the great part, Eli, is that there's not a specific logic that it has to be an augmented chord in order for you to play this. It's not like, okay, here's this keyhole, I must use this key, right? Of course, you can use that over an augmented chord, but here's the cool part. You can just have the piano player playing a dominant 7, and you can play this over. And it's got a lot of cool tones, because if you're going over a C7, right, then if you start going through this scale pattern, like do be do 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 be do 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 be do do, right, then you've got the 1, the 3, you've got a sharp 5, you've got the dominant 7, you've got the sharp 11, which is the 4, sharp 4, right, and you've got a 9. So you're hitting a lot of hip tones by just thinking one way in a whole tone scale. You see what I'm saying, right? So there you go. That kind of answers that. Okay, hold on just a second. So I might get cut off because this thing is saying I have less than a minute. If it does, I'm just going to restart, and then you guys can rejoin to the thing, okay? Because the thing is like flashing on me. Okay, so I don't know what it's going to do. Huh. Yeah, I don't know. So if we get cut off, we get cut off, and we'll just restart. Or pick up where we left off, you know what I mean? So that's the cool thing about whole tone, is that there's only 2 of them, right? And each scale is symmetrical. And there really doesn't need to be a breakdown on that, so to speak. It's just, hey, I'm feeling like I want to just interject this kind of like dreamy sequence in whatever scale I'm improvising on. So you can do that. And a lot of times you kind of get that outside sound. You hear soloists, and what they'll do is they'll be playing along pentatonics and blues scales and things like that. And all of a sudden that you hear them kind of go outside the changes. Sometimes they call it slipping outside the changes. And the and you're like, whoa, what was that they just went into? Sometimes it's something else, but a lot of times it's just playing a whole tone scale. Because you will be, for instance, like if they're playing, like I was saying, Eli, a C7, then that G, that 5th that they're playing is going to clash with your G sharp, but the majority of the notes are going to sound inside. So there's a couple of that slipping in and out as you're going through a whole tone sequence. You see what I'm saying?